Welcome to Behind the Play, a video and podcast product of The Hoop Show that explores the lives of Geelong players, past and present, as well as the off-field figures that are keeping us Geelong strong. My name is Paul James, and today, it's just me. It's just me on The Hoop Show this week. It's just me on Behind the Play this week. It's been a quiet week for the YouTube channel. It's been a quiet week for the podcast feed. Ben has been away in Bali. I have been knocked over with gastro. We don't have a guest. It is the gap, the pre-finals bye this week. And so I thought, the recovery's there. I can talk on camera for half an hour or whatever it is. Let's make myself the guest. Why not? Let's go. So in this particular episode, it's just going to be you and me, listener and viewer, as we talk about my love of the Cats, how I came to fall in love with the Cats, what my history is with the club, and how things have progressed from there. Like how did I come to be a part of the Hoop Show? All of those sorts of things. And these are things that you've probably heard little aspects of so far with past guests. I've touched on things here and there where maybe my story potentially aligns with theirs, or we share a similar path in certain aspects. But there's certainly plenty of things that we haven't discussed so far, and things that I intend that I'll talk about today that I'll intend to kind of bring to the show in various capacities in the future. That's a little tease for some stuff that's I'll probably talk about within moments. So yeah, let's get into it. So I'll try and kind of follow the beats that I would normally follow in a normal episode of the show, but of course it is just me, myself, and I don't have someone to wax with, so it'll be shorter. I kind of know the prompts that are coming. I know what we need to talk about, and I guess I normally begin by talking about where did the love of the game come from? And my granddad played for Geelong. Bill James, he didn't play many, or William James, I guess would be more specific. I think if you're looking for him in the books, didn't play many games. I think it was about half a dozen, unfortunately, before he had a back injury and wasn't able to play anymore. So his career was cut short through injury. And this is, like I said, he's my granddad, so this is back in the 60s, if I recall, the 1960s, and didn't get to play many games as a result. Of course, medical, sports science, all those sorts of things, they're not what they were these days, so that was career over. And he went on to become a principal, a school, a teacher, a principal, which, funnily enough, that's the pathway I found myself into. So kind of adopted a few things from him at the end of the day. The love of the Cats, hit those few games that he played, instilled everything through his children. He had 7 children. My dad was one of 7. And yeah, that was just, it took off through his children, and that was something my dad passed on to me, and he always had a love of the game. Dad was also, Dad played very high level cricket, state level sort of cricket. So I believe there was a time there where he was in it up to his eyeballs. And I'm sure I was the firstborn. I'm sure I had something to do with the reason why that didn't eventuate. I don't know, Dad, if you're watching or listening, I'm sure you possibly are at this point. Please clarify for me. Tell me if I was to blame. But yeah, I guess the love was kind of for the game was instilled pretty early on, thanks to these influences in my life who loved Geelong and loved footy, and so I was down to Auskick from a young age. I was getting into it as soon as I possibly could. I loved watching the game. Still, one of my first footy-based memories is unfortunately not one that we all look upon overly fondly. The 95 grand final loss. I don't recall seeing a lot of it. I remember patches of the game. I remember things not going. I remember the day not going overly well, as any Cats fan kind of knows. The 95 grand final wasn't a successful one for the Cats, and I was 6 at this point. And me disappearing to go play video games or go outside and kick the footy or whatever the case was after that. I feel like I distinctly recall, I think, being a fairly bright and sunny day, so I might have gone outside a little bit. I probably spent a bit of time in front of another screen as well. But that's kind of one of my first footy memories that I recall. That was a sad day as a Cats fan, but I guess I was fairly fair weather for a while. Dad would take me to games, but I'm a little kid. the interest is divided between a whole host of different things that are in my life, from video games, which, I mean, for anyone who kind of knows, and hell is just watching the video version and paying attention to the background here, my layout, my setup here behind me, that's all video game stuff. There's lots of PlayStation bits and pieces in the background. There's Nintendos, there's Xboxes, there's figures from all sorts of games, there's art books. It's all, like, video games are a huge part of what I do outside of my full-time teaching career, and earning a little bit of money from that as well. So, there was several pillars there. There was my schooling, there was the social life, there was video games, there was footy. I'd play cricket in the summer. Like, I think things that are pretty, they're not overly unusual for a child of the 90s and early 2000s, nor is it unusual of a child today to have so many different interests and those sort of things. But I guess it meant, like, the level of focus that I even see from some of the students that I have these days, who I can talk to some of my students in the lower year levels. When I say lower year levels, I'm a high school teacher, so we're talking year 7 and 8. They're early teens. They can rattle off a ton of detail about the players, everything that's going on. I didn't have that at the same point, but I also think there's a big difference in terms of the amount of information that was available then versus now. If you're a footy mad kid, you can pore through the club's websites, the club's social media feeds, and learn tons about the players, which is not a luxury I had back in the day. It was, the footy record or what you heard on the television. That was about it. Maybe the big footy preview magazine that would come from the Herald Sun or whatever at the beginning of the year. So that was kind of the extent of it. So I didn't necessarily hit, like, I'm not like a kid of today who had all this information at the snap of a finger and could recount all these sorts of things. But like, I understood how incredible Gary Ablett Senior was, and I would watch him whenever I could. When Dad would take me to a game, I'd be looking out for him and what he could do. But even then, I was kind of coming in, and my interest in the game was really peaking at a point where he'd left the game or was on his way out. So, I don't have a ton of actual live memories of seeing him play. And it was a lot of my memories of the game really started to form from that early 2000s period, as and I don't mean 2007 and when we got successful. I mean 2002 and those things, when the players that we all know and love, the Jimmy Bartells, the Gary Ablett Juniors, Cameron Ling, Joel Corey, all these guys, like they were all, Cameron Mooney being recruited from North, where they were all coming to the club at this particular point in time, and it's kind of that period that I started really getting my head around the ins and outs and the day-to-day, and listening to radio commentary and those sorts of things. Like, I had a little radio, just like a clock radio in my room, and I'd listen to even after I'd been sent to bed. Sorry, Mum and Dad, if you're listening again. Like, I think you knew anyway. You knuckled under. Like, I would pop the radio on and I would listen to the commentary of a game if I'd already been sent off to bed and it was a night game or something like that. I'd sit and listen to it, or even if it wasn't a Geelong game, I'd tune in, or I'd listen to the post-game commentary, those sort of things, or I'd tune into early AM stuff, and listen to kind of the discussions that were going on, the talk back lines, all of those sorts of things, just to hear more about the game and learn about what was going on. Because even at that early point, that early 2000s, like, I grew quite attached to those players. Jimmy Bartell in particular was one that I really took a fancy to. He was one that, like, I guess at the same time when I was playing my own junior football down in Gisborne, he was a player that I really idolised. I loved the way he just attacked the ball. And to be fair, that was something that I guess in my own game I didn't necessarily, despite the fact that I really idolised him and the way he went about it, bullet a gate, attacking the ball wasn't necessarily, like, I was very much trying to play an outside, touch-free sort of game for quite a while. It was really only my last couple of years in the junior level where I learnt to kind of, not that I had a ton of size, and I certainly don't now, but I learned to just attack the ball, just take the hit. And it was at that point, kind of, I guess, probably under 14s, when I think I just had a crack at one point and got bashed into, and there was nothing. Like, I didn't really feel anything from the whole thing. I got the ball, in fact, and cleared the possession at that point. That I realised, hang on, you don't have to be worried about this thing. If you go as hard at the ball as they go at you, there's a good chance that you're both in fact going to be fine. Like just make that ball the goal. And that was, I think, when like I really started to advance in my game, and I started, like polling fairly well in our kind of local, junior level sort of best and fairest and those sort of things, especially in my last year where we had an A and a B team, and while I was a staple of the A team, the B team was a team, especially towards the end of the season, were right on the edge, teetering on the edge of making finals, and so there was a few of us that would sometimes play in the A's, and the Bs would play afterwards, and we'd suit up again and go around again, and I think that and sometimes there was a real point of need if they weren't playing in the same location that you would actually just, well, the A's, like, because we played in 6 grand finals in a row in the A's. We lost the first, we lost the last, but we won the 4 in the middle. And so like there was a degree of confidence in what the A's could do. So there was a couple of weeks where like, don't worry about playing A's, go down, help the Bs, try and help them get the win. And we got them into the finals, and it didn't end well at that point because all of us that were in the A's moved back to the A's for our own finals that we had to play, and the Bs kind of got pumped pretty quickly in the first final there. But yeah, they were representing, so great. But when it came to the best and fairest that particular night, like I finished top 3 in the A's and top 5 in the Bs, despite the fact that I'd spent probably only 2/3 of my time in the A's and probably only half the games in the Bs. Again, allowing for some time there where I was playing in both, like some days where I would play both games, and so that was. That in the end, that under 16s year was my final year of football. The decision was kind of made. Look, and I was an underager for context. Finishing school at 17 years old. Decision was made at that point. I want to do as well as I can at school, and if like I've got this love of footy, I can come back to it. Which is not something that ultimately happened. I got sucked into my schooling, and I have no regrets about that, and I'm very happy with where I am professionally now, and the fact that even like today, thanks to Ben, and we'll talk all about Ben and the Hoop Show and how that all came into play shortly. Like I've got my platform to really indulge the love of football, but I lost the love of playing the game in that year, and I think it was mostly, to be honest, it was a bit of a weak way out. It was like it was that June time, and the weather starts to turn, and there's a lot of rain, and it's not overly pleasant outside, and you look out the window and you go, pretty glad I'm not doing that right now. And or not out there training in that kind of slop or that torrential rain. Like I used to love the post like go home and have that post game shower after it had been absolutely hosing for the entire match. But then when I never had to get hosed on in the first place by the rain, that was even more satisfying. So, yeah, I kind of fell out of love of actually playing the game in that particular year. But I love the opportunities I get to get a ball in hand and have a few shots on goal. Or like I've taken, as a teacher these days, I take, not often because I have a very high VCE teaching load, and so I don't like to be away from them if I can spare it. But like I'll every now and then, every couple of years, I'll try and take a U level out to, for footy or whatever the case happens to be. So getting out for the training with them, or even when I'm on yard duty on the oval, and try and shell a few around the yard. And like I've like there's a few that I launch around the school oval and go, oh, like I'm still connecting with it all right, and it's been half a lifetime ago at this point, which is also a bit depressing to say, but it's more than half my life ago now since I stopped playing footy. That's kind of where the love of actually playing kind of stopped. But with that love of playing having come to an end, that then also meant that I was really focused on the consumption of football a lot more, and through things like the footy show before the game. Again, radio stuff that we're talking about. We never had Foxtel in the house at that particular stage, so I wasn't kind of consuming any of the Fox footy content. But I had a couple of friends who did, and whenever I go around there, I'd kind of tune in. I obviously have some pretty sad footy memories from that time. There's a certain final, certain 2005 heartbreak that still lingers in my mind. And in fact, the person responsible for said heartbreak is a name that I'll never mention ever again. That I distinctly remember that whole night basically being Dad had brought home a projector. He'd brought home a projector for us to watch the game, and the projector was set up, and we were watching Geelong and Sydney, and it was meant to be this whole cinematic thing, and we were going to have an absolute blast with the whole thing, and it ended in heartbreak. And I distinctly remember sitting there on the couch, like beside myself in tears, because I thought that we were home and hosed. Like, that was, to me at the time, that just seemed so obvious we were going to win that game, and it didn't eventuate. 2004 was obviously a bit heartbreaking as well, though it was with the prelim the year prior against Brisbane. I was there for that one. In fact, I was there for every Victorian final that particular year, so we didn't go to Geelong and Port in the qualifier, but I was there for Geelong and Essendon, there to witness the last time Essendon won a final, something that I consistently rib some of my Essendon colleagues about now. And yeah, the prelim was obviously a bit of disappointment, but we rebounded a couple of years later. 2007, it was my first year out of school at that particular stage. I'm 18 years old. My MCC membership, which my mum and dad had signed me up for basically at birth, had come in, and I was a restricted member, and so I was kind of limited to what games I could go to. No, actually, have I got that right? No, I'd been restricted for a little while prior to that, but 2007 was the year where I became a full member, which nowadays, like, if you want to become a full member, you're waiting until much later. I think the waiting queue or waiting line is even longer than what it was back then. No, that was the first year that I'd become a full member, so that's what unlocked the opportunity for me to go to the grand final. And so, I mean, it was a good year to finally get that full membership and get to go see Geelong absolutely obliterate Port Adelaide in the grand final that particular year. And of course, see Geelong's first piece of silverware, like official home and away season silverware, come home in 40 plus years. It was an incredible day, and something that I'll always look back upon incredibly fondly. And obviously that year marked the beginning of this era that is still continuing today. Like, we're 15 years later, and still Geelong is in this thing up to its eyeballs as we record this. Again, it's the mid pre-finals bye, and we are top of the ladder, and we are the premiership favourites, and it may not work out for us. I'm bracing myself for heartbreak, because that's kind of how things have gone now ever since 2011, the success in 2011. But I've just been so fortunate to have really, my entire adult life so far, 15 years, has just been filled with Geelong success, and I've been to so many games over the years. Not so many in recent years, thanks to COVID and having kids. And having kids is so far, and I've spoken about this on the show, I have not been to a game all year, and it has killed me. And it got to about, I don't know, around 12, 13-ish, give or take, before I realised that, okay, look, at this point, the circumstances are going to make it really hard. Like, it's not easy. My parents are overseas, and we already call on my wife's parents for a lot during the week. They do a power of work to support. My parents have been overseas a lot. So I didn't really want to ask any more of my wife's parents to try and help out. But, so it was more of a case of, okay, look, let's just put the queue in the rack. Let's accept that I'm not going to get to any home and away games, and save all the brownie points with my wife for finals time. And so that's exactly where we stand, and I'll be going to the qualifying final to get, my first look at Geelong since 2021. I was able to go to Geelong and Hawthorn, which unfortunately was unsuccessful for us. No, we won that one. That was the famed Jordan Clark sprint down the wing goal there. Then so that ended up well for us, but thankfully, geez, it would have been a long time without even a win to see face to face, let alone a game. So we got the chocolates in that one, but it's been a long time since I've been to a game, and I'm so excited that Geelong and Collingwood next week will be that game that I finally get to go to, because I love this game. I love going to the game as often as I can, and I just haven't been able to, for a combination of all very legitimate reasons, and nothing that I can blame anyone for, except, I guess, whichever prick came up, created COVID, wherever our origin of COVID is. That person I'll blame, but or people, whatever. But yeah, I mean, I guess, from 2007 on, I was already going to the game quite a lot more because I had my restricted membership, so Dad could just kind of whisk me along with him whenever we could, and so I went to the game. Most home games, or most Victorian games, certainly most games the MCG because of the MCC membership. But he'd reserved seats at Skilled, I think it was at the time. Skilled, Simmons, Shell. I don't know. There was lots of different name changes through that period. But we had reserved seats for through a few years there. So certainly until Dad kind of first moved overseas, which kind of coincided with my first year of teaching, which is when I was 21. So we had the reserved seats, and we went to a lot of football through that period, and it was a very fortunate period to be able to go to a lot of football. Saw a lot of wins and did not see many losses. 2008 obviously was something that really, really hurt. I went to that game as well. I went to 2007's grand final and the elation and ecstasy from that, but then also went to 2008 and was so heartbroken. The only luxury, and I think I've spoken about this in previous episodes, the fact that I had to go and work my part-time job immediately after the game. The boss wasn't able to give me the night off. I worked at a pizza shop. Wasn't able to give me the night off, but was kind of allowing me to go to the game and then just get back and get straight to work. So the siren sounded and we lost. In fact, did we leave? We might have even left a couple minutes before the siren, just knowing, okay, this can't be saved and I've got to go to work. So we left, naturally to jeers of those brown and gold bastards. But that didn't end well, but I didn't have the opportunity to digest it in the way that perhaps a lot of other people did, because I was boom straight out the door. I've got to work, I've got to go. 2009 was another heartbreaking one for me, because I would argue that's the best of the three wins. I think most people would probably agree that's in terms of the spectacle and the nature of the win and everything behind it, that's probably the best of the three. And I wasn't able to attend because of that same job. This time, it wasn't that the boss was trying to be a jerk about it or anything like that, or forcing me to work. She was, but simply because this was a family-run business, and the family was St Kilda supporters, and so many of them were at the game that then resulted in us staff basically being forced to stay. And so I couldn't. I watched on TV with friends, and went off to work afterwards and was beside myself ecstatic. And of course, they eventually walk into the shop afterwards with their Saint scarves on, feeling destroyed. And I tried to be as respectful as I could for that. They're walking into their own workplace, but with a smug Geelong supporter in the room. But I kept my mouth shut and tried to show respect. I think it's the least you can do. You never want to be a bad winner. So 2009 was the grand final victory that I missed, unfortunately. But I've watched that footage so many times, and the Paul Chapman goal just echoes in my mind all the time. 2011, I attended with my ex, or wasn't my ex at the time, but is now my ex. And I of course, a grand final win, looks back so fondly upon that game, and the way Tom Hawkins grew into this immense force that day. He just ripped the game apart in a way that was just completely unbelievable. And so I will always look super fondly upon that day. Had a great time with it. felt supremely confident going into the day just because of how we'd beaten them in a really tight contest early in the year. We obliterated them in the final round of the season, and they were the only team the only team that Collingwood couldn't beat that year, and that proceeded to be the case again in the grand final. And I feel like to this day, the nature of those 2 wins that we'd had was something that was kind of scarring the Pies. Like they seemed like the unstoppable force in every other game all year until they ran into the Cats. Every single time the Cats would put them in their place. And even when the odds were completely stacked against us, like in the grand final with Podsy going down, suddenly this young bloke who's been really inconsistent over the course of the year, like he's getting there, you can tell he's going to be a star, but he hasn't made it yet. He has his ups, he has his downs. That's the moment that he comes of age and completely rips the game away from the Pies. It was something incredible and something I really look back upon incredibly fondly. Over the years, been there for lots of big moments. The Tom Hawkins goal against Hawthorn in 2012 is something that that's probably still my favourite, despite the grand finals, is still probably my favourite footy moment. Was there in the crowd for that really awesome position. There's a great video out there that I think the club might have had something to do with, but I'm not 100% sure. It might have been something also that Fox Sports did. I can't recall, but it was basically like a compilation of several pieces of commentary from K-Rock to the televised broadcast to footage from the crowd and how they were reacting from a certain portion of the ground. It was really, really incredible being able to watch that, and it's something that every time we play Hawthorn, still to this day, I'll watch that clip 4 or 5 times because that goal, that moment echoes in my mind. And of course we had so many great wins against the Hawks, and the Kennett curse was something that I loved at the time, but of course it was bookended by a grand final loss and a preliminary final loss. And so I think there's always that lens that we've got to apply to that whole period, which for as brilliant as it was in the middle, it was bookended by disappointment. And so those Hawks fans will still always have it over us, unfortunately. But there's been other incredible moments again, mostly against the Hawks. Things like the Isaac Smith shot after the siren that lost, watching Harry Taylor sprint up that ground for no apparent reason, not really sure what he was doing still to this day. That was hilarious as well. But of course, and we're creeping closer and closer to the modern day where COVID has influenced the game, and I haven't been able to. So devastated to not be able to go and see Gary Ablett's final game in 2020, let alone it being grand final, but not being able to go and see that still really saddens me. I was thrilled to get to see a few games when he came back. I was obviously going to the game fairly regularly with my then girlfriend, now wife. We were going to see plenty of games. So got to see the Master when he came back, which was awesome, but I was really, really sad to not get to see his final game. And that grand final, despite the final outcome, the way what Richmond did, to their credit, as much as I can't stand the loss, and I really have grown to resent's not the right word, but become incredibly frustrated by a lot of their supporters over the years. I can kind of understand where some of it comes from, because they were kind of the verbal punching bag for everyone in the comp for a long time, and then they strung a few awesome years together and won 3 out of 4 premierships, and naturally they're kind of entitled to crow, but they got way out of hand. But all credit to the club and the players and everything they did to kind of celebrate Gary. It was their moment to celebrate, and everything was so well earned for them, but they stopped to celebrate arguably the greatest player of all time in just such a respectful way. It's something that I wasn't able to be there for, so I'm so thankful that they did and really added to that legacy in his final moments, because he was injured as well and couldn't play it the way he wanted to play. It was such a sad ending, and I'm really sad I couldn't be there. But I guess it is what it is, and we're now getting close to sadly getting close to the end of another chapter with the likes of Joel Selwood, for example, that hasn't confirmed that this year's his final year. In fact, may not be his final year, but we are getting tantalisingly close at this point. Tantalising is not the right word. Sadly, we're getting very close to the end for Joel at this stage. And I just hope that I'm there for it. I hope that, similar to Gary, we know that it's coming and I can be there for it. Maybe it's the final day, the final Saturday in September, and hopefully we're there. Like, I'm there at a grand final, and like his final game ends up being a celebration of not just his career, but a 2022 premiership. That'd be a fantastic way. But I'm trying not to cast my mind too far forward yet, because we have seen so much disappointment as Cats fans in the last 6 to 7 years. There's the likes of Hawk and those sort of guys. Like, I was thrilled that I got to be there for Jimmy when it ended for Jimmy, because he was someone that I idolised and looked up to so much. But yeah, I guess that's kind of the summary of kind of my consumption of the game over the years, my love of the game, my love of the Cats. And honestly, the idea of creating content about the club is not something that I'd at all considered. Not at any stage, really. But as I've kind of cited on previous episodes of the show, I have and we've obviously already touched on, like, the video game stuff. I create a lot of video game content, from Let's Plays to my written reviews. Like, that's kind of the bread and butter, and where everything kind of started is the fact that I was writing reviews about video games and got picked up by the Player2 outlet. That's player2.net.au for anyone curious. We're one of the biggest outlets in the country, reviewing video games, all for the love of it. We're one of the biggest, but there's not a lot of money in games media in Australia, so we're all doing it for the love of it there, and just kind of doing what we can. But we've got a fantastic reputation within the industry, and I think it's something we've very much earned. Was something we're very, very proud of. But there's a lot of love, blood, sweat, and tears that goes into something that's not earning us any money. But within that space, it's really given me opportunities to indulge some creative passions, from the written reviews to the Let's Plays, which is a bit more fun and games and those sort of things, to the podcast side, which is where my weekly show Patched comes from. Two of my best mates, Bado and Damo. Damo's not been on the show for quite a while, thanks to having a dodgy internet in his current residence. But like, we used to, pre-COVID, we used to get together on the couch every week, stick the camera in front of us, talk about it. We'd record the video version. I'd export the audio version from that. These days, which similar to exactly how I'm recording this now, we'd jump into it. Well, similar-ish, because this one's me on my own, but like, we'd record, I guess, similar to the way I do any other episode of this show. I've got the guest on a video call, and I've just got a layered video product there where I can just insert that person straight into that video, and boom, you've got yourself a final product. That's exactly what I'm doing here. And like, I thoroughly enjoy doing that for Patched. I've had some other, like, kind of some products called Gamer School, which is basically like a deep dive. I mean, Gamer School, and I'm a teacher, that's a surprise. Bit of a deep dive into the entire history of a particular series or whatever, and that really really dives into a kind of a thesis side. Like, I'm really, really getting into the nitty gritty of that and picking through the history and presenting that in a way that is hopefully informative and educational for people. But then the one that's really at even the core of this show is my game developer interview series called Dev Diary. Dev Diary is a one-on-one interview series, very, very similar to what I have with Behind the Play, where I talk to game developers from around the globe. They share their journey and how they kind of got to the point that they're currently in, and the projects they've worked on, the people they've worked with, all of those sorts of things. And that show is doing really well. It's something I'm really, really proud of. It's kind of my number one passion project, alongside this, as this is kind of, as I've been doing more and more of this, those two are like, this is really growing in stature. And I'm like, I mean, I'll talk about the nature of the work that has to go into this shortly, but because it's a little bit different. There's a little less time that has to go into this one than Dev Diary. But like that, I throw my all at Dev Diary, because I get to talk to all these incredible creators, people responsible for some games that I've absolutely adored. Games have sold to millions and millions and millions of people that have created all sorts of incredibly happy memories, sad ones as well. And to just understand how one person, which in some cases one person out of hundreds or even thousands who've worked on one particular game, have helped shape that final product. It's something that really fascinates me. So, like, I mean, there's times where I've been completely consumed by the guest and the story they're telling, that I've completely lost sight of the fact that I'm the host and actually need to drive the conversation further. And I've kind of, the normal things that, like any good host, there's a bit of, yep, yeah, oh yeah, okay, like those sorts of phrases to kind of remind the viewer / listener that it's a two-way conversation. Because especially an audio version, when it's just that's all you've got, and then you just hear this one person, the guest in this case, kind of talking for minutes and minutes at a time. I guess similar to what I'm doing right now, 35 minutes in according to my timer here at this point in time. That can get pretty tiresome. Well, not tiresome, but you can kind of... They can potentially get a bit monotonous because it's just been that one voice for quite a while. Again, probably like I'm sounding to you right now, because I don't have a co-host here to bounce off. So kind of those little tricks of the trade I've kind of learnt and picked up over the years to basically remind the listener, specifically the audio version, that it's a two-way street still. But there's been times where I've totally fallen into the trap where I've been so immersed by what the person's had to say that I've completely forgotten the fact that I am the host and that I am actually running a show here, and I've just stopped and listened, and you kind of get that sort of starry-eyed, looking at them and listening sort of moment. Because it's really an honor to get to talk to some of these people. In some of these cases, I've been able to speak to these guests, and obviously not through the COVID years, but some of these guests, these are big overseas, within the video game world, these are like the top tier celebrities. And a couple of these cases, I'm getting to talk to them face to face because they've come to Australia for maybe some press circuit or whatever the case happens to be. And I've had the incredibly humbling opportunity to chat to them. And like it's a privilege that I'll never take lightly, but it takes a lot of work to get to this, to get to that point. Whether it's working with PR, whether it's just sliding into developers' DMs to see whether they'd be interested in coming aboard the show, and like there's a lot of work that kind of goes into that. I've got books. Where's my other one? Here it is. This book is completely full of notes for about the first 80 odd episodes. What's the last one? Oh no, I don't number them. That's right. I mean, the last episode in this one is from this year, and like the show's been going since 2018, but I filled the book this year and I've moved on to a second one. My son loved the red, so here we are. I'm using a kind of a red notebook now. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of time and effort that goes into that, from getting the guest on the show to recording the episode, some post editing, kind of cleaning up the audio, dulling any background noise, trying to kill off ums and ahs sometimes if the sort of person's maybe a little bit more on the nervous side, not super comfortable in front of a mic or a camera, just kind of dulling those a little bit. And look, I still do plenty of ums and ahs, as you've heard throughout the course of this episode. Again, it's a bit harder doing it on your own for now 37 odd minutes. But I absolutely adore the show. And I adore all my work in video games. And will continue to do it for as long as I possibly can. And I've now found some little side hustles in that space that are earning me decent dollars each month to complement what I'm doing in my full time, which is really, really nice. It's really rewarding to kind of get that. As much as I'm doing it for the love of it, it's nice to be able to help grow my household, help feed my family, to help further justify in a way why I'm doing what I'm doing. But that all leads across to, like, the dev diary component leads all the way across to Ben and the Hoop Show. And honestly, I can't 100% recall how I came across the Hoop Show Twitter account, but it was a Twitter exchange with Ben that kind of led to this moment. It might have just been like a Twitter recommendation, like you might be interested in, or tweets about AFL, and it was kind of there. And I saw this account, the Hoop Show, and it was Ben talking about, at the time, like well before really the content had even become what it's become now. I think even before the season started, or right on the eve of the season starting. Ben, I know you're watching, please clarify in the comments. We've kind of discussed this on his dedicated episode, but more from Ben's side. And I just kind of popped into the DMs, and because I think he was talking about other forms of interaction with the audience, and I was like, well, if you want to do a podcast or any of those sort of things, if you want any help with that sort of stuff, I'm more than happy to do so, because I've learned a lot of these tricks. This layout I created myself. Ben sent me a few key assets, but like the Hoop Show logo, for example, but all the rest, and I think he got someone to mock up the behind the play logo itself. But the actual construction of the layout and how it looks and how it presents, that's all me. And like I can help with those sort of things. I can help with getting it up on audio feeds and all those sorts of things if you want. And we kind of kicked the can around a little bit at the time, but nothing happened right away. And then Ben came back and was like, "Hey, let's make this a thing. Like your dev diary, why can't we do that, but with AFL people, personalities, fans, whatever?" And so that was kind of the seed sown, and ultimately has become the show that you now get to hear on a weekly basis for as long as the AFL season's going. Anyway, we'll see what happens in the grand plan when it comes to the off-season period. But yeah, that's kind of where or meets up with the current day in terms of what we're doing in this footy space. I love doing it. But one of the key differences, and one of the things that makes it more sustainable for me, and Ben, you're about to get a massive pump up here because it's something that I don't think the show wouldn't exist without Ben doing what he's doing. Ben, where with Dev Diary I have to go and chase down my guests and do all the legwork there, Ben does that for me when it comes to behind the play. On top of everything that I'm already doing, there's no way I'd be able to go and chase down guests for this show. And Ben had already kind of built a bit of a platform, and he's got Geelong Cats fans that are interested. He's engaging with former players. He's engaging with other people that have kind of associated with the club. He lives up that way. So, it was only recently that he was talking about how he was sitting in the cafe and it was filled with players and those sorts of things. I'm like, it's kind of cool. But those sorts of moments lead to opportunities and networking opportunities. And so it's led to having awesome people like Mel Katz on the show, who is a lot, has a lot to do with the club. We've had, John Aaron, we've had Steve Bracks, former premier, politicians and former premiers of the state on the show. We got Bundy as episode 1, which was such an exciting thing to make my first episode. A player who I loved watching at the Cats, and to be fair, loved watching in his time over at the Lions as well. And was such an incredible guest to have on the show. He gave so much of himself to it, and really helped make that first episode the gem that I think it still is. And obviously, it really helped, all the Dev Diary experience really helped even make that what it was, because I kind of already knew how to do this thing. I just had to apply it to a different format, which was nice. There wasn't as much anxiety from me as there was the first time I did a Dev Diary, for example, which also happened to be face-to-face. So, yeah, Behind the Play is kind of been born out of Dev Diary, really, and which is born out of a conversation with Ben, and something that's just kind of evolved at that point. And now we have fairly regular conversations about how we can continue to grow the channel further. What can we offer if we were to, there's a Patreon, for example, with the Hoop Show. I believe is down in the show notes on the YouTube version. Anyway, I really should apply all those same notes to the podcast version. I'll go fix that up. Sorry, Ben. Sorry. Yeah, there's, all those sorts of little aspects, like the Patreon, okay, well, what is it that we can do, that we can offer, that would encourage people to lend their support to help us grow what we're doing, but what can we give people to justify that? Because none of us want to just put out a hand and say, hey, please, can you help us grow? We want to give you something. So what can we use? What can we do in Behind the Play? What can we do with the core Hoop Show platform, whatever it happens to be, to help to encourage people to lend us their support, but by extension then help grow the platform itself. And so I think a lot of it at the moment, is continuing to just do what we do and help grow what we're doing. More of a natural sort of growth, just keep doing what you're doing, keep doing it to the best possible standard that you can. And if you do that for long enough, people will trust the product. People will buy into the product, and people will then potentially actually buy into the product, which helps us then grow the product. And there's this very natural cycle that occurs there, which is not disingenuous, it's not predatory, it's you scratch my back, I scratch yours. You help support us. We grow. We give you more. So on and so forth. And who knows what's possible out of that? I think about conversations with the likes of Caden McDonald on this show several weeks ago. Big Melbourne supporter. I'm sure a bit of banter back and forth will occur as we get closer and closer to potentially playing the D's in the finals. But I think about him and what he's achieved, and like his footy-based work is now a full-time income. And there's a little bit of, why not us? Why can't we be that? Now, sure, there's multiple of us when it comes to the Hoop Show. And so maybe it doesn't become we either have to become significantly bigger than Caden, and he is the biggest, so probably not possible. Or at least comparable to justify any sort of stepping back in our normal full-time day-to-day responsibilities. But why not us? Why can't we create a platform that Geelong Cats fans love to tune into on a daily basis, or a podcast that they can tune in on a weekly basis, or whatever the case happens to be? And so we're having these conversations to create a better product for you, the viewer/listener. And please, I guess, while we're talking about this right now, please shout us out on social media or in the comments on the YouTube version, and let us know what you want to see from the product in the future. If there's things that you would like to see, if there's the sort of guests that you want to hear more of on this show, for example, let us know about it. We'd love to continue to work with you to create a better product for you, I guess. And with that, I'll kind of move away from that because it sounds really preachy and promoty, and I worry that it's going to sound disingenuous, and that's not the case whatsoever. So we'll kind of move away from that, and kind of, I guess, start to hone in on almost the way that I normally end this show with a series of questions that I would normally ask my guests that I guess I'll turn around on myself. So the first one usually is, who's the greatest cat of all time? And for all my love of Jimmy Bartell, I think and for all my love of Junior, I think I've still got to say Senior. And I think I say Senior not like Junior is the greatest player of the two, despite all that Senior achieved and all the goals he kicked. But some of Junior's best wasn't at Geelong. In fact, a decent chunk of his best wasn't at Geelong. When it was when he was over at the Gold Coast. And so, that kind of works against him in terms of who's the greatest cat. Like, he did so much for Geelong, don't get me wrong. 2007, 8, 9, 10, the success that we had through that period, a lot of it is because of him. And I'd even argue a lot of the success in 2011, the grand final win, is because of him. He just wasn't there to join us for it in the end. He'd already moved up to the Gold Coast. We owe a lot of 2011 to Gary Ablett because of the culture that he helped build at the club. But at the end of the day, a lot of his best years weren't with the Cats. And so that kind of works against him, I think, when it comes to who's the greatest cat of all time. I think we look at Senior, we talk about Joel Selwood because Joel Selwood is not as incredible a player as those two, but I mean, the leadership, like what he has done for this club, is hard to measure. But I think at the end of the day, it does need to be Senior. The sheer brilliance of the man can't be understated. I got to see some of it live. I've seen a lot of it through old footage. And the guy could just do things that no one else has ever been capable of. And I think it makes it for a pretty obvious answer in the end. Given the choice of Junior or Senior, if it was a schoolyard pick style, for my next question, I would pick Junior. For all the reasons I said before, I think he's the better player, but he wasn't at Geelong. Well, that criteria doesn't have to apply here. Who would I pick if I had the schoolyard choice between them? I'd pick Junior. I know, like, it's hard to get a forward of that sort of quality, but they exist. Someone else can pick, I don't know. So if someone, okay, like here's your legion of incredible AFL players. I'll pick Gary Ablett Jr. You took senior. Oh, okay. That's senior off the table. Great. Plugger. And I guess you could make a similar argument. Okay, Gary Ablett Jr. is off the table. Great. I'll take Michael Voss. I'll take Nathan Buckley. I'll take James Hurt. Like, there's, if we want to go down the modern day great sort of path, I'll take Chris Judd. There are parallels in both of these spaces, but Junior has a way about him. Like, there's a magic about the way he navigates the field, and he impacted every part of the field, not just the midfield. He impacted up forward. He'd get into defence. He could do all of it. He would pick up a team and just carry them along, as he did for many of Gold Coast wins. You take Gary Ablett out of the team in those early years, and Gold Coast would have won nothing, ever. So yeah, Gary Ablett Jr. for me in that one. Who's my current favourite player? Well, we've already touched on the fact that Jimmy is my my overall player, and I have so much love for Jimmy Bartell. Tomahawk for me. From the moment he arrived, this big boy, puppy fat. Obviously the comparisons got made to Plugger very early on, and that was obviously all very exciting. He came along in the beginning of a premiership era. Didn't play in the first one, but came along in a premiership era, and he just has, like, he's this big, terrifyingly large man with a heart of gold. And I know he's done stupid things on the field, don't get me wrong. Like, he's done some dumb stuff and managed to get himself rubbed out in ways that I don't think there were, competition firsts for the way, like, for things that he'd done to get himself suspended, which was disappointing and hilarious at the same time. But there's just the way he carries himself, the way as a full forward he is so desperate to bring his teammates into the game is representative of how the whole club is, but it's something that you don't see other tall forwards do. Jeremy Cameron has learnt this a little bit since he's arrived. He was not the unselfish sort before. He would try and shell him from God knows where to kick some incredible goals, and would often kick some incredible goals, but now he lowers the eyes and he finds a teammate and still manages to kick 60-odd goals in a year as well. He's learnt that quality since coming to Geelong, and I think he's learnt that from being alongside someone like Tom. And it's made Jeremy a better player for it. But Tom is the originator of that, and it's something like, I just think that's so important. That it is a key forward that plays the most pure of team roles, team first roles. It's incredible. I love it. So Tom Hawkins, my pick. Future player, I'm not going to go Sam de Koning because that's the obvious choice, I think. The one that I have my eyes on the most is Cooper Stevens. I love the way he attacks the game. He's learning to accumulate more as of when we record this. His most recent game in the VFL, which obviously the VFL season is now over for the Cats. His most recent game, he racked up 30 disposals, and there was plenty of contested stuff in there as well. Like, he's a brute, and I love that attack on the game. It's similar to the Jimmy Bartell and Joel Selwood sort of approach that I've loved for so long. So, yeah, Cooper Stevens, the future player for me. Not necessarily an original pick, I guess, but I can't help it. He's the one that I can't help but watch. My current favourite... we've already discussed that. The 2022 outlook. This is an interesting one because of when we're recording this. At this particular point, we're about to start finals. We're in that pre-finals bye. The nerves are there. The brace for heartbreak. Like the outer wall, like, I'm kind of protecting myself a little bit because we've experienced so much disappointment over the years. We've come so close so many times, been heartbroken so many times. That I'm terrified that it'll happen again. But I feel better about this team than I've felt about any team since 2013, when we really genuinely had our last chance. And honestly, we should have obviously made it that day. A single missed shot from Trav Varco at the end there. That's not his fault, of course. We shouldn't have found ourselves in that position. But, it was what separated us from playing that grand final and ultimately winning that grand final. I think the winner of that game was the one who won the grand final, and I think everyone knew it, and it ended up being Hawthorn. So, yeah, I think this is our best chance since then. That includes 2020 when we actually made the grand final. And I just hope so dearly that this year, having come so close so many times, having faced so much criticism, the retirement village, Chris Scott's no good, all that sort of horrible, stupid commentary, I hope we finally get to throw it in their faces this year. But I don't want to get too carried away. I feel confident. I feel like we're the best team in it. But there's so many variables in this game at the best of times. I even think about Geelong and Collingwood this week, and I guess if we want to outlook a little bit, we'll maybe preview the game to come. Well, Collingwood and Geelong, obviously they met early in the year. And as we spoke about with Luke when he came on, Swoop Luke, one of our past episodes, we didn't necessarily dive into it as deeply as perhaps we could have or should have. But the nature of the game that the two clubs play, and I guess we weren't at the time because it didn't look like Geelong and Collingwood were necessarily going to play off in the first week of finals. But now that we're there, the two play a very, very similar brand of football, which is attack, and they're both just like charging ahead at all times. Sorry, still a little bit of that gastro business. They just charge ahead at all costs. And the concern with that, when you've got two teams that are doing that and they're running opposite directions, is that the ball only has to bounce one way instead of the other, and it favours one team. And the other team, who's wholly committed to attacking, is now caught so far behind the ball it's not even funny. And so I worry that the ball will bounce Collingwood's way that night, and we'll just be undone by some bad luck. And I don't mean in any one moment. I don't mean some sort of last-minute Jamie Elliott win for the Pies sort of thing. I mean, we just didn't have the rub of the green that night. Not free kicks, none of those sorts of things that people like to try and but we just didn't have the rub of the green. Things just didn't. The ball just bounced the wrong way for us. And when you've got two teams that play that attacking sort of brand, a very similar attacking brand, that could bring the other unstuck very easily, whoever that team ends up being. So that's my worry, is that the bounce of the ball could be basically what dictates the winner between Geelong and Collingwood here. And really changes the entire shape of the finals for Geelong, I think, if they find themselves on the opposite side of the draw. Yes, I think if we lose, we play the winner of... No, if we lose, we play the loser of Richmond and Brisbane. I think I've got that right. But then we also have to go on to play the winner of Melbourne and Sydney after that. So it becomes a very tough run after that because, as I think I've mentioned on the show in previous weeks, Sydney is the team that I'm most worried about. Richmond and Melbourne are the other two. And, we would have to play Richmond if they win, and I expect that they will. And then we would have to play either Melbourne or Sydney, all to make our way through the grand final. Doesn't excite me a hell of a lot. But at the same time, if we get through it and we actually get through those teams and make it to the grand final, we go on to win. Geez, we earned it. But yeah, I'm worried as a result. So hopefully the ball bounces our way. We get to the prelim and maybe we end up taking on a Richmond or whoever it happens to be in a prelim final. Hopefully we get over the line there. We go on to the grand final, which is once you make it, the day itself, who knows? But we've given ourselves every chance, and I just hope to hell that the quality of the game that we played against Melbourne early in the year pays off. That the game against Sydney was a bit of an aberration because it almost feels as though Buddy was always going to get his 1,000th that day, and it was just the whole thing was kind of pit against Geelong that day. Not to mention the growth that we've seen in the likes of Sam de Koning and the growth in the game that Geelong is playing since that point as well. There's so much that's changed. So it's a very, very different sort of thing. Richmond is something, a bit like Melbourne. We've played them kind of recently, and we kind of close to playing the game that we want to play against the both of them, and was successful both times. So I feel more confident about that. It's a little bit of the unknown of Sydney that's kind of the variable there for me anyway. But the outlook is good. I'm hopeful, I'm confident, but I am bracing. I'm kind of putting the barrier up because we've seen how this ends. We've seen how this ends, and I'm scared of how it could end. Because it might be it for a few of these guys, the players that we've loved for years. It might be the last time we see Joel on the field. You'd imagine we're probably going to say, maybe I'm projecting too much, but we could be saying goodbye to the likes of Lukey Dalhouse. We could be saying goodbye to several others as well that have been great players for the club over the last few years. And Joel, chief amongst them, obviously his entire career at Geelong. Because we are still kind of the old person's home. These guys are closer to the end than they are the beginning. And some of them will start to need to pull up stumps soon. So it'll be sad to end on a negative, but hopefully it doesn't get there. Hopefully we win the flag. Hopefully some of these guys do in fact leave, but with a premiership medallion around their neck, or at least being part of a victorious squad. I'm really, really hopeful. Really, really hopeful, and feeling as confident as I possibly can feel without wanting to scream it from the hills. But with that is how we're going to wrap things up for this entry of Behind the Play. I thought this would go for about 30 minutes, but of course I managed to talk at the camera on my own, no feedback from anyone, for an hour. It's just something you learn to do when you've been in podcasts for a long time. If you enjoyed the episode, please be sure to subscribe to The Hoop Show on YouTube and chuck it a like. Chuck the video a like. Share it around. Make sure to follow the show on podcast feeds as well. That is Behind the Play on all good podcast feeds and the bad ones. So it doesn't matter where you are. You can get it. YouTube, podcast feeds. Make sure to grab it. For myself, you can find me at Paul James Games on Twitter, at The Hoop Show for the show itself, and /Ben. But I believe he has his own personal one now. Don't know if he's promoting that, so I'll keep that hush-hush for now. And until next week, remain Geelong strong, and I'll see you later. Go Cats. Come on, let's bring this flag home.